But please welcome Brian Takumi on stage. Yeah. But I mean, how would you describe yourself? That's always the best question.
A lot of different ways. Speaking of growth, like my degree is actually in visual communications, but through my career and just my personal life, it's always been about trying new things. So even though I got a BFA in VisCom, as a kid, my parents were into art, so my dad taught me how to screen print, my mom taught me how to sew when I was a kid. So I thought I wanted to do my own apparel thing. I would make my own clothes, screen print my own t-shirts, make my own stuff. Also, I was very big into art, so like trying all kinds of different painting, watercolor, inks, things like that, even as, super interesting. How many graphic design, visual communication students are in here? Like, I mean, for me, graduating Cal State Long Beach, I think we were one of the last classes where like you had to have hand skills of like drawing, you had to take life drawing, you had to take painting, you had to take marker rendering. Like for those of you who don't know, like those things you get off stock photos or like comp with like photos you find on the web, we used to have to draw those in marker. So it taught you a lot of how to like actually like understand light and all those things and shading and photography and things like that when you had to draw it. So it was always a challenge and constantly this like growing from everything I learned and trying to find new ways. So being here at Oakley, like my title actually says brand, soul, and creative. And so I'm not necessarily product design, I'm not necessarily graphic design, I'm not necessarily comms. It's really about brand design and foundation. Through that, like I actually started out here in graphic design, and then because I was more interested in graphics related to product, I would do all the watch faces, textile design, surface graphics, environmental design, and things like that. I actually moved to product design, and then moved into apparel design. I was creative director for apparel, and then I would start working more on special projects like brand identity, brand design, and things like that. We had an internal creative group here who Cecilia was our director of project management forever. We had like art directors, designers, photographer, motion graphics. I think there was like at one point like 75 people here in that group. I mean, we did everything internally. And then through changes, whatever that happened with the merger with Luxottica coming back around, I went more into like really defining what the brand soul is. And that's where my biggest growth came from, because the challenge of this wasn't about Oakley as a company anymore. It was a brand in a portfolio of 40 other brands in the Luxottica organization, and you don't have control over the matrix organization. So the challenge was, how are you going to educate an entire organization of, at that time was 80,000 people. Now with Essilor-Luxottica, there's 250,000 people in the global organization who may be touching Oakley at any one point. So how are you going to get them to understand what Oakley is? And that's where my really growth came from, and where I am now in my career. I know that was a lot.
Yeah.
Where did I come from?
I mean, talking about like transitions, right? Like starting as like a visual communications person, and now obviously like being like the head of brand soul. Like, is there like one particular moment in time or transition between like one title and another that was like the most pivotal? You feel like looking back now?
Absolutely. Like when the integration with Luxottica happened, there was a CMO there, and she was, as much as even at that time, I thought I knew what Oakley was. And if you were here, I know there's some ex-Oakley people here. If you were in this place, it was always like, I'll know it when I feel it. It's just a feeling, you can't put pen to paper on it. And one of the things that happened was the CMO said, you guys don't know what you're doing. And it's like, no, you don't, like it's Oakley. And it's like, yeah, I get that. But you don't know how to build a brand. Like you don't know how to write a brand. You know how to like execute this brand, but you don't know how to do it. And we were like, F her, like she doesn't get it, whatever. And then it was like, I had just had this moment where it was like, maybe she's right. And that's where like was probably the most pivotal moment for me, because it challenged me to go like, how do you actually take a place like this and remove the subjectivity from it and actually document, if you had to put pen to paper on what makes it Oakley, that you could do that. And so that's really when I was like, took a step back from where I was. This is about 2016-ish. and said, man, I need to relook at what I'm doing. And your first always reaction is like, yeah, this sucks. This isn't the place for me. I'm going to leave because Oakley's not Oakley anymore. But instead, I took it as a challenge of like, man, can I do this? And so like really kind of went back to school on my own to like immerse myself into what I had kind of touched base on. If you're a graphic design student, I'll tell you this, the best thing you could ever do is minor in marketing. I actually minored in strategic marketing at Long Beach State too, and it was the best thing I ever did, because sitting there and going to graphic design classes and hearing like, oh, you need to get this, and the marketers, they're going to tell you to do this, and the A's, and then go sitting in marketing every day and hearing the A's go, yeah, the creatives are going to tell you this, this, and this, and being like, oh shit, this is how it's going to be. But to actually get that foundational thing of what's the difference between design and art. Art's just making stuff you want to make because you like it, or you're doing it for someone. Design when you're solving a problem. And whether that's product, whether that's graphic design, you're solving a client's problem. You can't just be making pretty stuff because of the way you like it. And that's how, I guess that's the way Luxottica looked at Oakley. Like, you guys are just making pretty stuff, but if you had to document it, you couldn't. So I spent the next few years just like going in and going to do all these workshops and immersing myself. And like,
timeline.
This is probably like 2017-ish, 18. And really like, if I had to actually document what makes something Oakley, could I do it? And so after going through a bunch of courses, workshops, things like that, it was bringing it all together of like, dang, like I know the brand, I'm in charge of the brand, and I know the DNA, and I work closely enough with the founder where he couldn't articulate these things, but for better or worse, I got enough stuff thrown at me by him to understand like, why do you think he was doing that? And so finally I was able to take what I was learning in frameworks of brand, marketing, design, all these things, and just apply Oakley to it. And that was where the growth really came. And so that was the pivotal moment when she said, you don't know what you're doing. And I was like, okay. And then flash forward to 4 years later, there were some shifts going on in Luxottica, and I was able to do work that actually got in front of her. And she was like, this is the best thing I've ever seen. Like, we're not doing this on any other brands. And the boulder started rolling of like, wow, you're actually putting subjective things of what people think the brand is and putting it into objective frameworks. She eventually left Luxottica, but that's what led to my role now, where it's like, Luxottica will actually use a lot of our frameworks a lot of the time to go, how do you define a brand?
For people unfamiliar, can you explain the relationship between Oakley and Luxottica?
Yeah, so basically Oakley was founded in 1975. The brand's 50 years old in North America for sure. I mean, obviously it is overall, but you see a lot of growth now in EMEA and different places around the world, Japan, things like that. But in 2007, we merged with Luxottica. And if you don't know Luxottica, I mean, it's the biggest eyewear company in the world. I mean, they license for most of the fashion brands. They own Sunglass Hut, Lens Crafters, iMed, the insurance, things like that. So Ray-Ban, it's a massive thing.
Ray-Ban as well.
Ray-Ban. House brands are like Ray-Ban, Persol, Arnett, Oakley, Vogue, and Oliver Peoples. So there's house brands, and then there's licensed brands. Like they have Tiffany, Coach, Prada, Versace, all them. So, so they run as a matrix organization. It's basically a manufacturing organization. Yeah. And even with Ray-Ban, they've never really had a brand. They acquired Ray-Ban from Bausch & Lomb in the late 90s. Arnett came through the Oakley deal. So it's very different for them to work with, like, they're more about producing units than it's like, okay, how do you build the brand?
Yeah.
So Oakley, like that's why fortunately our head of marketing, the CMO now, who is also oversees product, was very adamant about you need these foundational elements that can be objective. And that, through the organization, you have people here in the building who live and breathe Oakley. There's a team in Milan that lives and breathes Oakley on a daily basis. We have O stores around the world who are just dedicated to Oakley. But you're also talking about, they have Sunglass Hut associates who may have a customer that comes in and asks for Oakley once or twice a day. Yeah. So, and they have to know all the brands in there. So it's just how are you going to educate these people at different levels and knowing the expectation of what does a Sunglass Hut associate need to versus someone who's actually defining the product we make. So we have these different levels, but that's how we have to work with the parent company on a day-to-day basis.
Going back to the idea of like, pen to paper, like foundational elements, and like Oakley originally being like a very free-spirited brand where you guys can just like make anything that you guys kind of wanted to now being within like a bigger brand and having some constraints. Like is there any change in the creative philosophy of Oakley from the early stages, or is it that has carried over or transitioned, or is it completely different now, like the creative philosophy of it?
I think the creative philosophy and the DNA and the way we think about things stays the same. How we bring it to life had to evolve, going back to growth. Like it couldn't be, I mean, if you were here before, it wasn't uncommon. Jim would just walk around with bags of cash and go make this and get it done next week. Now you're like, okay, you'll get, whether it's our CEO now of Luxottica or our CMO is like, go make this, but you have to go submit this paperwork, you got to get a PO cut, you have to get approval from these 6 people. So there's a lot more planning, and you can't be quite as like just renegade with it. But that's all part of growth too. Like just like, okay, how do we do this in a way that we can succeed in the organization versus try and fight it too?
Yeah.
I think that's the biggest thing for growth. I don't know how many people in here have ever been through a merger. Yeah. And if you've been there, there's always like, whether it was an acquisition or merger, it's like, they don't know who we are, and we're gonna fight them, and we're gonna show them who we are. And the biggest thing we learned, and if you were at Oakley, Cecilia, you remember this, it's like, we're gonna show them who we are, and they can't change the culture. Ryan, who's my boss now, like we look back at it and go, the best thing you can do when the merger acquisition happens is start going, how are we gonna be successful in this situation? The worst thing you can do is think that they're gonna go, okay, we're gonna sell you back and we're gonna stay out of it. Not gonna happen, the merger's done. So we talk about control, partner, influence. When you're like, they don't do it, what do you control? What do you need to partner on? And then who do you need to influence with?
Yeah.
And so it's a little different of like, well, I'm just gonna control the whole thing and go do it. This control, partner, influence is like, there's good things to being part of a global acquisition like that is you have access to a global network before that capital-wise, we would never have been able to do as a company. And we, even in creativity of technology or R&D and things like that, you now have partners around the globe who have PhDs in optics and things like that that you can leverage versus being like, well, let's figure out how this needs to work. So that's where it's like, how do you start to evolve your process and work within that framework than trying to necessarily fight it. And the good thing with Luxottica is we do have the right partners and we have the right CMO who's like, Brian, you have to make sure that the brand comes to life in this. And that's the biggest thing. And that's the interesting thing when the merger happened creatively and there's people who like, we would see this like, Luxottica just wants to turn Ray-Ban, Oakley into Ray-Ban. And it was super interesting because the founder of Luxottica, who was Leonardo Del Vecchio, who was richest man in Italy, more than the Nutella people and things like that. And that's where we were like, you couldn't really argue with him because what are you going to tell the guy who's the richest man in Italy? You don't know what you're doing. He's like, I'm pretty sure I do. But he was very adamant. Like people are like, he just wants to make more frog skins and things. And we fortunately or unfortunately, we were very able to work with him on a very personal basis. And he actually yelled at us one time where he was like, we would make, how many people know what a frog skin is? Yeah, it's basically like a Wayfarish type style. We call it frog skin for, Jim called it frog skin because it was a derogatory name, because it represented selling out because it looked like a Wayfarer back in the 80s. But when they bought Ray-Ban, I mean, what's the number one Ray-Ban style? It's a Wayfarer. So, and when Wayfarers, this is probably like mid to 2015 or 16, 17 in there, and we were making like all these different frog skins, and he finally got mad at us and said, what are you guys doing? And we're like, what? It's like, these are like Wayfarers. They're like, he's like, yeah, I didn't buy Oakley to make more Wayfarers. I bought you guys to be Oakley. You need to be Oakley. Like, if all you're gonna do is Wayfarers, do you know every time you sell a frog skin, you know who that steals a sale away from? Ray-Ban. In case you forgot, we own Ray-Ban. stop making frog skins. And so that was where it's like, wow, he really wants us to be Oakley. Like, he's like, where's my over the top? Where's the crazy stuff you guys do? You guys keep coming with safe stuff. We already make all that. We've got, show me the Oakley stuff. So
yeah. The imagery that comes to mind when I think about this idea of like growth, but within constraints, is like this idea of like a bonsai tree, right? Like a bonsai tree is like very manicured and like very like particular in the way that it's like maintained, but each bonsai tree has like, it's still like very unique identity. Like no matter how much you try to like make an exact bonsai tree the same with another bonsai tree, it's just not gonna happen, right? It's still gonna have to have its own identity. And so with that being said, like how does Oakley now intentionally like prune ideas and directions and grow? Because I know you guys also recently started this new, I don't know if collaboration is the right word, or partnership with like Travis Scott. Like how would you describe that like relationship, and if that's a part of this like new growth?
I think, you know, through that process of defining the brand, there was a project I worked on that he wasn't CMO at the time, but our leader said, hey, you need to write the secret recipe for what is Oakley. Like, document it. Yeah, I'll touch into some of it, but it was like, and if we've done group Y, things like that. I've done a presentation there on it. You can find it online, I talk about it, but it's like, how do you actually put pen to paper on what is Oakley? And so it's super interesting because there's a section where it's like, what are the beliefs, creeds of like what makes something Oakley? And so there's some ones like, we're satisfy the eye, the mind, and the heart, which is like how it looks, how it works, how it makes you feel. If you remove the logo, how do you know it's Oakley? Design for the future, deliver to the present, reimagine everything, do what others are afraid to do what others can't do. And there's 9 of them. And those became like our guiding principles of like, if you go through some of the conference room, you actually see this poster up that actually says, why is it Oakley? Why is it different from others? And why should the audience care? And so anytime there's a project going on, whether that's a comms piece, a design piece, CMF type work, anything going on, you should be able to answer those 3 questions. And it should be one of those 9 creeds. Great if it's all 9. But the reason for that was I've sat through so many design reviews, crits, pitchbacks, things like that. And it's like, oh, this is totally the Oakley design DNA, or totally the Oakley DNA. And so finally I started going, what does that actually mean? And people would go like, oh, I don't know, I just think it looks really Oakley in the DNA. And I'm like, okay, what is that? Well, it's metal, it's spikes, it's a skull. And I'm like, okay, where have you ever read that before? Well, I haven't. I'm like, so this is just your personal interpretation of what you think Oakley is. It's like, so the bonsai, it's like you're just making stuff to make stuff. You're not pruning it. You're just letting it grow because that's what, you know, you're not putting the effort to prune it into something. And so that was really starting to be the filter of like, this is what makes it Oakley. So, you know, and super interesting that I did a podcast with it, and it actually got back to our founder. And so his son texts me, he's like, hey, Pops is trying to get a hold of you. And this is like 2 years ago. And if you knew how it worked here, it was like, oh man, I'm gonna get yelled at again. He doesn't even work here and he still yells at me. But, you know, one of the things that happened, he's like, I opened the email and I'm like, oh my God, I've never seen an email like this. If you worked with Jim, he never gave a compliment. Even when he loved something, it was like, great, you did what you were supposed to do. And so like to actually get an email that was like, this is amazing. This is the best body of work I've ever seen on Oakley. And then I Zoomed with him because he's in Vietnam. He's like, you did it. He's like, you put pen to paper on what is Oakley. He's like, no one's ever been able to do this. And this was like a couple years ago. And so I was like, wow. I'm like, I can't believe he said that out loud.
Is that when you asked for a pay rise?
No. Well, unfortunately, he didn't work here anymore. So he's like, yeah, that's great that you're saying that, but you know, you don't actually own the company, and that's not going to help me out now. But emotionally, it was great. I mean, to hear like the founder who used to throw stuff at you and tell you you're stupid and whatever, to come out and actually compliment you was great. And so getting back to Travis, it's like the world's changed. I mean, you look at generational theory, like I'm a big generational theory person, looking at trends, how the generations have different values, things like that. And so when you look at now, like I'm a Gen Xer, so when you go back to that age when I started Oakley, which is 28 years ago now, you look at like Michael Jordan, Mark McGuire, regardless of whether he got popped, Lance Armstrong, there's a lot of PED going on cheating then too. You look at the way sports heroes were looked at as basically these bigger than life people. And now it's like, and I don't know if there's not people like Kobe, Jordan, things like that. Mahomes is great. He's one of our athletes. But athletes aren't quite like they used to be of transcending sport to become these global icons, even when you have like the Ronaldos of the world or Mbappe and things like that. They're not like that. For us, it's still like those kids are into sport. Yes, they're transcending. But when you look at like youth culture, I have never seen anyone like Travis. I mean, for females, like Taylor Swift does it. But these icons now, like the influence they have on Gen Z, even my kids are Gen Alpha, and you know, it's amazing. Like we were at the Travis Scott concert in Europe, and it's like, maybe you've seen in some of the coverage that happened, literally registered as earthquakes in Europe, 80,000 kids at these. And I don't mean like, oh, it's like 18 to 24 year olds. This is like 18 and below, and you're like, how do these kids even get out of the house? Let alone they're like all going to a Travis Scott concert. But it is insane that these kids who, some of them don't even speak English, but they know every word to his music. And he pumps the energy up and he makes them feel like part of it. Obviously, Astro World in Houston things went awry on it, but that's the effect he has. So it was like when we talk about like the effect Michael Jordan had on the brand in 96, 97, 98, you know, versus Travis Scott now. Travis is a guy who, you know, fits into that. He when we sit down with his team, it's very much like, man, they got a lot of the ideals like Oakley of like run and gun.
Like,
you know,
the early version of Oakley?
Yeah, if you remove the logo, how do you know it's Cactus Jack? They fucking know. And they know meticulously, and like even, I mean, you guys, if you know Travis, like his whole brown palette that he's got going on, it's like, man, they're not just like, it's brown. They have very specific things, and when you hear Travis talk about it, it's very much like, too much red, this feels like this is this, and you're just like, I thought it was just brown. But it's the same way we would work creatively in the past of like, yeah, that logo's not right.
Where did that relationship like come from, or like where was it born?
I think we have this guy Dylan Radloff on our team who's very well connected into that street culture world. So, you know, it actually goes back quite a while, even pre-pandemic, when Travis's team reached out about starting to do stuff. I think the past, you know, we just announced the Travis relationship this year, which is formalizing it. But if you've seen Travis the past probably 3 years wearing Oakley, that wasn't coming from us. He was doing that by choice. Like that's why they kept hitting us up, because they're like, we're getting all this stuff off eBay, and like, what do you guys have and things? And we were just like, let's formalize it, because he was wearing our stuff without us even ever approaching him about it.
So it just made
sense of like, yeah, it's like dating. Oh, maybe we should get married. So I mean, go back to growth. It's like, it's a relationship that was kind of like you were pre-dating, hanging out, and then it was like dating, and then it was like, yeah, let's just tie the knot on this thing.
Going back to the philosophy of like building for the future but delivering for the present, like, how do you do that? Like how do you build for a future audience that doesn't exist still?
You know, that's a hard thing when Luxottica and of course AI. I mean, I love AI at the same time. AI only knows what it knows. So that's always going to be a backwards looking thing of what's out there versus what doesn't exist. So I think the most important thing is having a vision of what your future wants to be. If you're basing it on things that have already happened, there's another creed we have in there, which is if you always do what you always done, you always get what you always got. And of course, Luxottica as an organization is a very data-driven organization. And, you know, I think a lot of it is finding the balance too, when you're going to work in an organization of this size. We do work for an organization where, I mean, you're working, so the goal is to make money at some level, but you have to find the balance. You can't have it all being black frog skins. You can't have it all being over the tops. You just need to be able to find the balance of like, what's going to drive what's brand push and what's market pull. And it's not about one or the other. It's about finding the balance for it. And then when you're doing that brand push, that's where it's like, what do we want the brand to look like? What do we want eyewear to be in the future? What do we want whatever category to be in the future? Super interesting is when you look at, most people don't even know we make footwear, which is awesome. At the same time, we don't get credit for that. When you look at this whole Gorpcore thing that went into footwear, you look at like Ye, what he was doing at Yeezy, what Balenciaga and things like that. If you get a chance, there's actually, when you go out the store, there's a museum that runs right underneath where you are now. You can go and take pictures, go look through there. But it's super interesting that when we found out that when a lot of the original Oakley footwear from that program that started in '98 is actually on a lot of designers' mood boards now. So if you go look at a Balenciaga Triple S sole, go look at the sandal that's in there that came out in '99. It's not by accident that this stuff looks like you're seeing now, looks like Oakley stuff. Unfortunately, we were 20 years ahead of our time. And that's where you got to find the like balance of like, if you're going to be that future forward with it, where's the things that are the commercial availability of it?
Does anybody have any questions or
Yeah, you guys are
comments?
quiet. Like,
yeah.
This was supposed to not be a speaker thing.
How do you like, I guess in this world of commercial marketing and everything, how do you manage to navigate your intuition still, and then also kind of allow others to follow their intuition but within that constraint?
I think part of it is that's why the creeds are there and those filters go, whether it's my point of view or someone else's, I'm like, hey, if you can actually explain to this of why it's Oakley rooted in the creeds, those are the guiding principles, okay, it makes sense. Because I'm not the target consumer anymore. I'm like, we're trying, who's the new talent, who's going to bring those connections in. But that's where it's also like getting that new talent to understand, hey, how do you work within this bonsai tree versus like, well, I don't want to do bonsai, I want to do ivy. It's like, well, we didn't ask to, that's the whole different thing. I mean, that's going to tie back to your bonsai thing about like, we're making a bonsai here and someone comes in like, yeah, I don't want to work on bonsai. It's like, okay, then you're doing your own thing then. Here's the bonsai, make it fit those creeds, and how do you work within that? I think there was another question there.
Yeah, hi, thank you. I was wondering if at some point you did reach creative autonomy, and if that cycle kind of kick-started with the departure of your CMO.
There's never really autonomy, like complete autonomy, because I mean, even regardless of whether it was here, anywhere else, you're always working, if you're going to be in design, you're always working for a client. And you have to be able to navigate those conversations, whether you're in an internal organization or even if you're doing it for a client on your own. You have a client you have to answer to, so it's like you're never going to get that complete autonomy. I think it's finding ways you can speak to things in an objective way about why you did it versus it just being, well, I just think this looks better. And we, even internally with those things, we hear it all the time. You'll hear it from a designer, I just think this looks better. It's like, okay, that's not, then it's your personal opinion versus like, well, I think this will work better because it's going to be in this situation with this lighting, this is what's going to be going on, so this is why we did it this way. It's like, okay, that makes sense. So
you were explaining the difference between a designer and an artist, and that a designer solves problems. How do you see the artist and the designer working together, and where do you see a creative in that world?
I think, there, even when we talk about Oakley, the satisfy the eye, the mind, and the heart is how it looks, how it works, how it makes you feel. So there's a certain amount of creativity in there. I think there was even a statement we had, which was physics elevated to an art form. And even though we would say art form, there is when you look at this building, when you look at a lot of the product, there's a very artistic way we treat it, but it was still very much done with a philosophy to solve a problem. And so that's where when I say difference between design and art, it doesn't mean aesthetic doesn't come into the conversation. For us, aesthetic is actually a huge part of the conversation. I mean, even so much that even my own designers who work for me get frustrated because I'm like, these lines aren't working out and they don't have a logic to them. And what I mean by logic, this is the intensity that we would put to aesthetic is, look at the edges of that screen up there. Are they parallel? They seem like it. But basically, here's the thing. If you actually looked at those edges and extended them all the way up and you kept looking, they actually aren't parallel. They're actually going to a vanishing point. Think of when you look at the road, when you're driving on it. The edges on the freeway, they're all parallel. But when you're looking at it, they're actually not parallel because they're coming to a point. So we would actually get into this of like, this is where I guess the, I'll tell you this story. I had to work on actually was working on an internal collateral piece, and Jim came in and he's like, hey, you need to put a line to separate the subtitle from the copy. I was like, okay. So I put a line there. He goes, that's not an Oakley line. I was like, what does that even mean? He's like, you need to put an Oakley line there. And I'm like, what the? So I sat there for a week drawing lines. And I'm like, we were in this building and I'm like, and this is the 90s. So I'm like, does he want tribal? He's like, it needs to be more graphic. And I'm like, I like the tribal. I'm like, I do a flame. He's like, no, that's too gimmicky. I'm like, oh my God. I sat there for a week drawing lines, probably like 700 different lines. And I was like, I don't even know what this guy's talking about. And finally I did this where I basically took a circle, squatted it all the way down to basically it became a line, and it basically just tapered. And he went, that's it. And I was like, what the hell? He's like, that's an Oakley line. And I'm like, and it took me probably, unfortunately, even in that moment, I was just like, whatever, dude, I just don't want to draw any more lines. And finally I got to the point when I was doing the secret recipe thing, I was like, oh my God, this all makes sense now. Logic. He would have this thing, he would talk about splayed logical offset geometry. And he wouldn't let us we couldn't do striped t-shirts. Because he's like, you can't, stripes, I hate stripes. And it all dawned on me of like, this is what even in art, there was a logic that went to it. Does it make sense? So even though the problem was, you need to separate the subtitle from the body copy, the artistic point and the logic was, put something there that separates it, but you need to do it in an aesthetic way that lives up to the Oakley DNA. And it was this super slight tapered line, because Jim was like, parallel lines don't, for him, found this out later, parallel lines don't exist in real life. That was just his philosophy of how he saw it, is because it's like, when you go out into the real world, you can, yes, go down the street and measure, like walk down the whole street, measure it's gonna be the same length. But when you look at it, it's never actually, that would be Picasso-ish of like, what's going on here? This is cubism. But in real life, he was like, parallel lines don't exist in real life. And I was like, man, this is a whole level of aesthetic that's like, this is what he would look at when he would do things. And we have this other one that like, simple is hard, hard is easy. Because it was like, it was easy for me to draw like tribal or do flames and things like that. To take the most basic thing as simple as a line was, even though the answer was simple, it was really hard to make an Oakley line where you can't add all these other things and make that graphic seem like that. I know that's a long answer, but that's where it's like, it's where you see the art, problem solving, and design as a whole coming together for us. So.
I have a question along the same lines. Let's say we want to build a brand like Oakley today, and would you think about it from a problem-solving space, or would you think about it from a design space? If you're starting like really just now, if you want to start in some.
From a design space, I'd say it's really hard now, just because certainly you have AI now where anyone can almost make anything. So those things that Oakley did back in the day, you didn't have AI, you actually needed people to be able to draw that and have that vision. Now that AI's there, I think for me, like when you talk about Gen Z, certainly Gen Alpha, I don't know if you guys have heard this before, there's some different things that say Gen Alpha for sure, but Gen Z somewhat, is the storytelling generation where millennials were, whatever you want to call it, the gratification or things like that. the storytelling's there because now that with AI, creativity's been completely democratized. I mean, whether that's in copy with ChatGPT, Claude, any of those things, with Midjourney, anyone can make anything. Nano Banana, you can just go make a whole thing that, whatever. The thing that with that is now that anyone can make anything so crazy, all of a sudden crazy becomes the norm. So when they talk about Gen Alpha and Gen Z, you'll hear like, it's gonna be the storytelling generation. Because now it's gonna be more about what's the story that goes with that versus just making crazy stuff, because anyone can make crazy stuff now. So how are you gonna create a story that becomes compelling enough to catch people? And certainly now with social media, you got 3 seconds to actually grab someone and do something. You need something that actually, there's gonna be a deeper story. I mean, that's the first thing is like, even if you make this crazy Nano Banana thing, that's gonna get them past to 3 seconds. If there's nothing meaningful after that, they're gonna check out. So that's where the graphics are part of it, the artistic's part of it, but you need a story that goes with it too. That's gonna be something compelling. I don't think it lives on creativity on its own.
Talking about young people and then kind of going back to like this idea of like balancing between multiple voices, like between, you know, Cactus Jack, Luxottica, Oakley. Like how do you create space for younger artists now? Like with like the democratization of like AI and like creativity and everything like that, but it's still harder than ever for younger generation people to find new opportunities. Like how do you, is there any semblance of advice or anything like that that you would give to a younger generation? I
mean, the thing for me, like I was saying, is like, what's the story behind what you're doing? I think the other thing is finding your why. I'm a big Simon Sinek person too, so like, you know, start with why. When you go through, super interesting, we'll talk about it, and people will get into like, well, you just need to know your why. But if you actually do the whole Simon Sinek thing, you know his thing is like, you need to know your why, how you do it, and then the what that's gonna come out of it. If you just focus on the what, and you don't know your why, you're just making stuff to make stuff. If you have a how, but you don't know the why, actually I feel like that's what kind of Oakley was, and when I got challenged with putting pen to paper, we knew our how, we didn't know our why. And that's where it was like, all this documentation was to get back to the why. I would always go start with why you're doing it. And that goes for whether you're starting a brand, your personal career, your own personal journey, any of that stuff. It's so helpful to know like, what is your why? And that will drive your how you're gonna do it and what you'll achieve by doing that.
Is your brand archetype public facing?
No, and I think, you know, archetype, I love that you brought up archetypes. How many people in here have actually read Hero and the Outlaw or know what Hero and the Outlaw is? I mean, my team, the team that's here from Oakley, which they better raise their hand. Hero and the Outlaw, if you look it up, Margaret Marks is considered the godmother of archetypes in branding. I'd recommend reading it if you do. Basically, everyone here will know what the Jungian archetypes are. There's 12 different personalities. Margaret was one of the ones who spearheaded like, how do you use those Jungian archetypes and apply them to brands? And that's the biggest thing where you're like super interesting to go, if you are who you connect with who you are. And if you're trying to say you're like a hero archetype, but you're behaving like the everyday, you're gonna wind up attracting the everyday consumer versus the hero. And so, you know, it's super interesting. We do a lot of I'll do a lot of archetype work. One of the best ones to see brands I'll talk about in archetypes is probably around 2012 with the London Olympics. And if you've ever seen it, that's when Nike did Find Your Greatness. And if you've seen that campaign, Find Your Greatness is a very hero archetype of like, yeah, we're great, whatever. How did they show that? They had a little skinny black kid on the top of a 30-meter high dive trying to decide if he was gonna jump off the diving board. They had this heavy kid running down a dirt road, you know, and it was like, wow, this is relatable. Meanwhile, you have brands like Under Armour who were like, click, clack, own the world, beat your competition. And, you know, Nike, for being the behemoth that they are, the one that sticks with people is Find Your Greatness, because it was like, wow, this little black kid's up there on a 30-meter high dive trying to jump, getting ready to just jump off. Not dive, but just jump off. Yeah, and that, I mean, how many of you guys know the story of the Just Do It campaign? Yeah. just do it is like amazing, because it's like, if you don't know the story, like Nike was getting, this is 80s, and it was like, everything was like, we're the best athletes in the world, and you guys are laughing, so I'm assuming you're from Nike, or?
No, we just
Oh.
resonate with that generation.
Back then it was like, they actually got feedback of like, Nike's not evolving because this is pre-Just Do It. All you do is show elite athletes winning, and I don't resonate with that. So the reason they did Just Do It was like, anyone can do it. Like, it's not about winning, it's about doing it. And that's when Nike exponentially blew up. And I think at times, like, even we were talking about this at the Paris Olympics, like, the Nike campaign they had at Paris was a little like, whoa, this is not Nike. Like, this is like kind of Under Armour-ish, where like that campaign at Olympics was like, I can't remember what, own your competition, be the villain. It was like, whoa, this is such a departure from those inspirational moments of Nike to like, I'm the best and we're better than you. And so that's where it's like, it's important to have those, to understand those archetypes, to go like, okay, who are we really being? So for Oakley, like, when you look back at the history through those Y2K eras, it was very rebel. Us against the world, we're gonna do this, things like that. But when you actually look at like the 70s and 80s of it, it was very much the explorer of like finding new territory, go where others haven't been, design for the future, deliver to the present, being ahead of the game than necessarily it was about giving the middle finger to the rest of the world. So where we are now is actually getting more back to that explorer archetype of pushing boundaries, being an inspiration versus necessarily being an instigating anarchy. So.
We'll do like one
Will's
or two more
laughing.
questions if anybody has one.
I got a question for you, Brad. So 28 years. Woo! When you think about product, event, concept, execution, what's the thing you're most proud of?
Couple things. One, so getting here, getting early on, like getting to work on a Lance Armstrong piece and being like, I mean, obviously there's a lot of stuff that happened later on, but it was like, wow, I'm actually working on a Lance Armstrong piece. And I grew up as a bike rider, BMX kid, so to be like working on that was super inspirational. I think as you flash forward, and you know this, like I got away from actually doing, my job right now, I actually, for better or worse, sometimes I do design, but for the most part, I don't actually get to work on design anymore. But 2018 Olympics, we had this thing called the Harmony Fade, which was these goggles that were like half neon yellow, half orange. And I remember getting home from work, turning on the Olympics, and the ski jump and snowboard were on. And it was like, that's probably one of the most popping pieces we've had at the Olympics, and just being like, holy crap, all these athletes are wearing that. And it was just like, man, this is the world's biggest stage. And winter is smaller than summer, but because it's smaller, it's a little more focused because all those, and it was like, wow, the amount of people who were wearing that design, that at that time I actually did do that one. It was just like, that was like, got teary-eyed over that. Execution wise, I'll have to say, like, I'm usually not very emotional over the execution because just the pace, are like, whatever, we did this. We actually had a 50th event that happened in July here that Travis Scott performed at. We had some Nike people here that showed up and things like that. And people were like, Terry Crews was the host of the night. I mean, it was insane, the thing we built out front, and it was seamless. Like, I have never actually been, I mean, you were here, I've actually never been at an Oakley event where some shit didn't go completely off the rails, or like, just tech stuff too. Like, even the feedback of the microphones, like, that stuff happens here daily. When we do it, it's like, God, we can't even, the mics are giving feedback. I mean, we had 2,000 people show up, or no, what do we had 1,000, I don't know, how many? You guys, 1,200 people show up. Travis Scott, who Travis is a wild card in general. There was so much chaos leading up with this, like even Wednesday before, Travis said he wasn't gonna make it, we scrambled. And the evening went off without a single hitch. I have never seen it. Oakley event happen like that. That's also probably because we brought out an outside production company. And they know Travis, so they knew how to work with them. But still, it was like, if we had done this ourselves, it probably would have gone off the rails. But it was seamless, like down to the minute. Like we were doing rehearsals and I was like, wow, the director was like, he's like, you gotta wait. And I'm like, dude, you're like serious about this dress rehearsal? He's like, no. I'm like, we're running full dress rehearsal to time out everything. Like, he's like down to the second. And then I was like, is it really gonna go this smooth? Like when we do this thing? And he's like, well, that's the plan. And I'm like, wow, your optimism's great. But sure enough, it did. I was like, wow. And so like to see that, we actually got Jim to shoot a video and speak at it and things like that people were like, so that was probably like, wow, we actually pulled off this with a shoestring budget too. That was the most amazing thing, because like the Nike people are like, you guys must pay it. How much did you pay for this? We're like, this much? And we're like, sure. So
we'll leave it off with one more. What learnings would you give your younger creative self now?
I mean, find your why and pursue it. I think there were times where it's like, I loved being at Oakley. I loved how we were doing it, but because I never took the time to do those steps about understanding the why, I look back and go, like I told you the story about when the CMO at the time was like, you guys don't know what you're doing. Like I look at what I'm doing now and go like, man, if I had known this 20 years ago, where would we be, or how could we have managed the relationship with Luxottica or other partners if we had been able to do this 20 years ago versus after everything happened.
Well, thank you so much. Yeah, thank you guys so much for coming out today. We also have
we do. If the store should be open now, one thing, if you want to go through the museum, go into the store and it runs right underneath you. The other thing is, if you want to shop, we have 40% off cards if you want to buy anything, so come down and grab one if you want. And thanks for coming out. I know it's a haul. Foothill Ranch is not exactly easy to get to. On top of that, especially for those who drove far. On top of that, it's a rainy day, so thanks for coming out all.
Yeah, but we'll be taking a pause for December for the holidays, and so we'll be restarting in January, so we'll hope to see you guys at future events. But thank you so much for coming. Feel free to hang around and spend some time.